The darkness came without warning. Commander Yara Chen had been reviewing star charts in her small diplomatic shuttle when the first explosion rocked the hull. Red lights filled the cabin. Alarms screamed. Before she could reach the emergency controls, the airlock blew inward, and massive figures poured through the smoke. She fought. Of course she fought. Yara had survived too much to go quietly. Her fist connected with something that felt like stone. Pain shot through her knuckles. A hand the size of her torso wrapped around her throat and squeezed. The world went gray, then black. When she woke, everything hurt. She was lying on cold stone in a cell carved from black rock. The ceiling hung low, maybe 3 meters up. A faint blue glow came from strips along the walls. The air smelled wrong, thin and metallic, like breathing through a copper pipe. Yara pushed herself up slowly. Her head pounded. Her uniform was torn, and dried blood crusted along her hairline. She checked herself carefully. Nothing broken, nothing missing, just bruises and a headache that felt like someone had driven a spike through her skull. The cell had no door that she could see, just smooth black walls on 3 sides and a shimmering energy field on the 4th. Beyond it, she could see a corridor and other cells stretching into the distance. Shapes moved in those cells. None of them were human. She counted at least 6 different species in the cells she could see. Some were massive, covered in scales or armor plates. Others were thin and fragile-looking, with too many limbs. One appeared to be made entirely of something like purple smoke contained in a vaguely humanoid shape. None of them looked at her. They all sat or stood or floated in their cells, staring at nothing. Waiting. Yara had been a commander in Earth's deep space fleet for 12 years. She had survived a hull breach on Europa Station that killed 30 of her crew. She had spent 16 months stranded on a moon called Kepler 442b, where the atmosphere tried to kill her every single day. She had pulled wounded soldiers through enemy fire and held dying friends in her arms. She knew what defeat looked like. She saw it in every cell around her. These beings had given up. Hours passed. Maybe days. It was hard to tell. Food appeared in her cell at regular intervals, a gray paste that tasted like nothing and sat heavy in her stomach. Water came from a small spout in the wall. She slept on the bare stone, using her torn jacket as a pillow. She spent every waking moment watching, learning. The guards came through every few hours. They were tall creatures, almost 3 meters, with 4 arms and 4 eyes and skin the color of dried blood. They moved with the confidence of beings who had never faced anything they couldn't crush. Other prisoners called them Korvathi. Yara memorized their patrol patterns. She noted which guards paid attention and which ones were lazy. She tracked the timing of meals, the rhythm of the lights, the subtle hum of the energy fields that kept them caged. On what she guessed was her 3rd day, a different Korvathi came to her cell. This one wore robes instead of armor. His skin was darker, almost purple, and he carried himself like someone used to being obeyed. The energy field flickered and died. 2 guards stepped in, their weapons trained on Yara. The robed Korvathi followed, holding a small device that he pointed at her. "Human," he said. His voice was deep and rough, like rocks grinding together. "You are human, yes? From the planet called Earth?" Yara stood slowly. She was half his height. She didn't let that show in her posture. "Commander Yara Chen," she said. "Earth Defense Fleet. Serial number 77429. You are holding me illegally. My government will." The Korvathi made a sound like crushing gravel. It took her a moment to realize he was laughing. "Your government knows nothing," he said. "Your species barely leaves its own star system. You have no power here, no voice, no value." He studied the device in his hand. "Except as entertainment." He explained it to her like she was a child. The Korvathi Empire ran the largest gladiatorial circuit in the known galaxy. Beings from hundreds of worlds were captured, purchased, or bred to fight in their arenas. Billions watched the broadcasts. Champions became celebrities. Everyone else became corpses. "You will fight," the administrator said. "If you win, you earn privileges, better food, better quarters, perhaps even a small amount of freedom. If you lose." He made that grinding sound again. "Your remains will fertilize our agricultural moons." Even in death, you will serve the Empire. Yara kept her face blank. Inside, her mind was racing. My species, she said carefully. You haven't seen humans fight before? The administrator scanned her again with his device. Your kind is new to us. Soft. No natural weapons. No venom. No armor. No speed worth mentioning. Weak bones. Thin skin. You require specific atmospheric conditions just to breathe. He lowered the device. You will make an entertaining opening act. The crowds enjoy watching new species. They will bet on how quickly you die. He turned to leave, then paused. The odds against you in your first match will be significant, he said. Some of my colleagues believe you will not survive 30 seconds. I have wagered you will last at least 2 minutes. Please do not disappoint me. The energy field hummed back to life. The administrator walked away, his guards following. Yara sat down on the cold stone floor. She was alone, trapped, and scheduled to die for entertainment. Her government didn't know where she was. No rescue was coming. She closed her eyes and began to plan. Over the next several days, she talked to the other prisoners. Most ignored her. Some told her to save her strength. A few laughed at her questions and called her already dead, but some talked. A Tessic assassin 3 cells down explained how Vrexians attacked always, leading with their dominant claw, always overcommitting to the first strike. A Pelori child, barely more than a young one of its species, described the layout of the arena from fragments remembered from its one match. Yara listened to everything. She remembered everything. The screens in the cell blocks played old matches on loop. She studied them like holy texts. She learned how champions moved, where they made mistakes, what separated those who lived from those who died. When the guards finally came for her first match, Yara walked out of her cell with her head held high. She didn't ask for help. She didn't beg for mercy. She didn't even look back. The arena waited for her in the distance, its roar already shaking the walls. She was ready. The tunnel stretched before her, carved from the same black stone as her cell. Lights flickered along the ceiling. The roar of the crowd grew louder with each step, a sound like thunder that never stopped. Guards walked on either side of Yara, but they didn't touch her. She was already going where they wanted her to go. There was no point in fighting now. At the end of the tunnel, a massive gate blocked the way. It was made of some kind of metal that seemed to drink in the light. Beyond it, she could hear the crowd clearly now, millions of voices blending into one constant wave of sound. A voice spoke from somewhere above her, translated into broken English by a device in the collar they had locked around her neck. Human female, first match, entertainment tier. Opponent, Vrexian male, 12 confirmed kills. The gate began to rise. Light poured in, so bright that Yara had to shield her eyes. The arena was massive, at least a kilometer across, filled with sand and scattered rocks and broken structures that might once have been buildings. The stands rose up on all sides, packed with Korvathi and dozens of other species, all of them screaming for blood. She stepped through the gate. The arena entrance shut firmly behind her. There was no going back now. Across the sand, maybe 200 meters away, another gate opened. The crowd's roar doubled. Something massive stepped out into the light. The Vrexian was everything the Tessic assassin had described, and worse. It stood nearly 4 meters tall, built like someone had combined a bear with a crocodile and then armored it for war. Scales covered every visible surface, each one thick as Yara's palm. Its claws were the length of her forearm. Its eyes were small and red, and filled with nothing but hunger. The betting boards flashed above the arena. The odds against the human, 200 to 1. The crowd was already cheering for her death. The Vrexian charged. It moved faster than something that size should be able to move. The ground shook with each step. Sand sprayed up behind it. That massive jaw opened, revealing rows of teeth designed for crushing bone. Yara didn't run. She waited. The Tessic had told her that Vrexians always led with their dominant claw. They always overcommitted to the first strike. They expected their prey to freeze or flee, because everything they had ever hunted did exactly that. The Vrexian swung its right claw in a blow meant to tear her in half. Chattermoved. She dropped low and rolled to the left, feeling the wind of the claw passing over her head. The Vrexian's momentum carried it forward. Off balance for just a moment, Yara was already running not away, but toward one of the broken structures nearby. The crowd went quiet. This wasn't what they expected. The Vrexian recovered and charged again. Yara reached the structure, a collapsed wall of stone about chest height, and vaulted over it. The Vrexian smashed through it like paper. But those few seconds let her reach the next piece of cover. She couldn't outrun it. She couldn't overpower it. She couldn't take a single direct hit without dying. But she could think. The arena was designed to look random, but Yara had studied the recordings. The terrain always followed patterns. Cover was placed at specific intervals. Hazards were hidden in predictable locations. The builders wanted drama, not quick deaths. She used everything. When the Vrexian cornered her near a pile of boulders, she scrambled up and leaped to another rock, making the creature climb after her. Its claws were built for killing, not climbing. It slipped. She gained ground. When it herded her toward what looked like open sand, she noticed the slight discoloration just in time. She jumped over it. The Vrexian stepped on it, and the ground collapsed into a pit trap. It wasn't deep enough to hold it, but the creature wasted precious seconds clawing its way out. She found a weapon, a broken metal rod, probably left over from some previous match. It wasn't much, but it was something. The crowd was no longer silent. They were watching now, really watching. Some of them had started stomping their feet, the Korvathi version of applause. The Vrexian was getting angry. Its attacks became wilder, less controlled. It smashed through cover that it should have gone around. It roared in frustration when Yara slipped away again and again. 40 minutes passed, then 45. Both of them were bleeding now. The Vrexian had caught her twice, once with a glancing claw strike that opened her left arm from shoulder to elbow, once with a tail swipe that sent her flying into a wall. She was pretty sure some of her ribs were broken. Her vision swam. Every breath felt like fire, but the Vrexian was suffering too. It was built for quick kills, not long fights. Its movements were slowing. Foam dripped from its jaws. One of its eyes had swollen shut from where she had jammed her metal rod into it during a desperate counterattack. 47 minutes. The Vrexian charged one final time, putting everything it had left into one last killing blow. Yara stood her ground. At the last possible moment, she dropped flat. The Vrexian sailed over her, claws slashing empty air. She drove her metal rod upward with both hands, finding the soft spot under its jaw that the Tisik had told her about, the one place where the scales didn't quite meet. The rod sank deep. The Vrexian crashed into the sand and didn't get up. Yara stood over its unconscious body, swaying on her feet. Blood ran down her face and arm. Her broken ribs screamed with every breath. One eye had swollen shut, but she was alive. The arena fell completely silent. 2 million Korvathi stared down at the impossible scene below them. A human, a soft, weaponless, hopeless human, had just defeated a Vrexian. Then a single Korvathi in the stands began to stomp. The sound echoed across the arena. Another joined, then another, then 1,000, then 100,000. The roar that followed shook the walls. Yara looked up at the crowd, at the betting boards that were going haywire as fortunes changed hands, at the Emperor's box where dark figures watched in silence. She said nothing. She didn't smile or raise her fist or play to the crowd. She simply stood there, breathing, bleeding, refusing to fall. The guards came for her eventually. They were more careful this time, treating her less like cargo and more like something dangerous. Medical drones followed, spraying her wounds with something that burned and then went cold. In her cell that night, she found a package waiting. Better food than the gray paste. A real medical kit with proper bandages. A blanket that wasn't made of stone. A message was carved into the wall, fresh enough that the dust still clung to the letters. The Empire is watching you now. Yara ate the food slowly, letting her battered body absorb the nutrients. She treated her wounds with hands that barely shook. She wrapped herself in the blanket and lay down on the cold floor. Tomorrow, they would send her to fight again. And again after that. They would keep sending her until she lost, or until they got bored, or until her body finally gave out. She closed her eyes. She had survived day one. Now she needed to survive every day after. The real work was just beginning. 6 months passed like a fever dream of blood and sand. Yara fought 17 more times. Each opponent was different. Each match was supposed to be her last. The Korvathi kept betting against her, and they kept losing their money. There was the Tessic assassin, not the friendly one from the cells, but a trained killer with forearms and blades hidden in places that shouldn't have been able to hide blades. He was fast, faster than anything she had faced. He cut her 32 times in the first 3 minutes. But Tessic assassins were trained to kill quickly, and when the quick kill didn't come, they became confused. Yara outlasted him. When he finally slowed, she broke his primary arm at the elbow and choked him unconscious with his own fallen blade pressed against his throat. There was the hive mind swarm, thousands of tiny creatures that fought as one organism, flowing like water across the sand. They could devour a Vrexian in minutes. They had no central brain to target, no heart to stop. Yara discovered by accident that they hated fire. She spent the entire match running, gathering anything that could burn, striking sparks with rocks. When she finally got a flame going, the swarm fled from her like she was the monster. There was the crystal creature, a being of living stone that could reform from any wound. She hit it with everything she had, and it just put itself back together. In the end, she didn't defeat it through violence. She led it into the pit trap and collapsed the walls on top of it, burying it so deep that it couldn't dig its way out before the match timer ended. A draw was treated as a win for the underdog. After each match, her reputation grew. The crowds began cheering for her before the fights even started. Betting odds shifted. The gray paste was replaced with real food. Her cell became a room with an actual bed. Guards who once looked through her now looked at her with something like respect. But none of it mattered to Yara. Not really. What mattered was happening in the cells below. She had started teaching during her 2nd month. It began with the Pelori child, a young one called Mirix, who had survived one match through pure luck and was terrified of dying in the next. Yara showed her how to move, how to read an opponent, how to use fear as a weapon instead of letting it become a weakness. Mirix won her next match, and the one after that. Word spread through the cells. Other prisoners started seeking Yara out during the brief exercise periods they were allowed. She taught them what she knew, and when she didn't know enough, she learned alongside them. A Thorn warrior named Kassax had been a soldier on his homeworld before his capture. He was 3 times Yara's size, covered in natural armor, and stronger than anyone she had ever met. But he was also slow and predictable, which is why he kept losing matches. Yara worked with him for weeks, teaching him to think instead of just react. He started winning. Then he started teaching others. The network grew. Yara learned that the Korvathi kept different species separate whenever possible. They believed that isolation made prisoners easier to control. They were right, but they had never accounted for a human who saw walls as challenges instead of barriers. She used the guards, not through violence or threats, but through patience. She learned their names. She learned their families. She learned their frustrations. One guard, a younger Korvathi named Veth, was different from the others. He had been forced into this work to pay a family debt. He hated what he saw in the arena. He hated himself for being part of it. Yara never asked him to betray his people. She just talked to him. Over months, Veth became her link to the outside world. He told her things, small things at first, then bigger ones. He told her about the laws that governed the arena, the ancient traditions that even the emperor couldn't break. He told her about champions' rights. Meanwhile, somewhere far away, Earth was trying to save her. The news of her capture had reached home after 3 months. Diplomats screamed at the Galactic Council. Admirals made threats. Politicians made speeches. But the Korvathi Empire was vast and powerful, and humanity was small and new to the stars. The council urged patience. They talked about diplomatic channels and proper procedures. They warned that a rescue mission would be an act of war. And war with the Korvathi would mean the end of human civilization. Veth brought Yara this news in whispered conversations. Earth was coming, he told her. She just had to hold on. Yara listened and said nothing about her real plans. In her 8th month of captivity, the administrators did something unexpected. They moved her to new quarters, nicer, larger, completely isolated from the other prisoners. They told her it was a reward for her performance. They told her she had earned the privilege of privacy. She knew the truth. They had noticed her influence. They were trying to cut her off from the network she had built. They thought they were punishing her. They didn't understand that the seeds had already been planted. Kassax was teaching combat techniques to a new batch of prisoners. Mirix was showing young ones how to survive their first match. A dozen others were spreading knowledge and hope through the cells like water through cracks in stone. Yara spent her isolation studying. Veth smuggled her recordings of famous matches, not just any matches, but championship matches. She watched them hundreds of times, memorizing every movement, every mistake, every pattern. She learned about Kethval the Undying. He was the greatest champion the Korvathi Empire had ever produced. 30 years undefeated, over 400 confirmed kills. He was worshipped like a god, feared like a demon. No one who faced him ever survived. The recordings showed a monster. He was massive even by Korvathi standards, augmented with cybernetic enhancements that made him faster and stronger and harder to kill. He fought without mercy, without hesitation, without any visible weakness. But Yara watched those recordings until her eyes burned. And eventually she saw something. In his 347th match, fighting a creature from a world she had never heard of, Kethval had taken a wound, just a small one, barely visible, a scratch along the left side of his neck, where his armor met his scales. He had killed his opponent immediately afterward, so quickly that most viewers probably never noticed. But Yara noticed. She went back through older recordings. The same spot appeared again and again, always protected, always guarded, never directly exposed. An old wound, perhaps. Scar tissue that hadn't healed right. A weakness hidden so well that no one had exploited it in 3 decades. Yara smiled for the first time in months. She had found her target. Now she just needed to reach it. The championship was held once per year. The current champion faced the highest-ranked challenger in a match that the entire empire watched. Yara was climbing the ranks faster than anyone in history, but she still wasn't high enough. She needed more wins, more time, more preparation. She closed her eyes and began planning her path to the top. The real fight wasn't in the arena. It was happening in the shadows, in whispered conversations, in lessons taught through prison bars, and the Korvathi had no idea what was coming. 1 year after her capture, Yara stood at the entrance to the championship arena. The gate before her was different from the others, larger, more decorated, carved with images of famous victories from centuries past. The crowd beyond was the loudest she had ever heard. 2 million Korvathi filled the stadium. 14 billion more watched from across the empire on screens and neural feeds. The emperor himself sat in his private box, surrounded by guards and advisors, and the most powerful beings in known space. They had all come to watch her die. Yara rolled her shoulders and felt the familiar pull of old scars. Her body was a map of the past year, wounds healed and wounds still healing, bones broken and bones mended, muscle built through endless training and endless fighting. She was not the same woman who had been dragged unconscious from her shuttle. That woman had been soft, untested. This woman was something else. The gate began to rise. She walked into the light. The arena had been transformed for the championship. Instead of scattered debris and simple terrain, the ground was covered in flowing sand that shifted unpredictably beneath her feet. Massive pillars rose toward the sky, casting shadows that moved as hidden lights changed position. The crowd roared from stands that seemed to stretch forever in every direction. On the far side of the arena, a second gate opened. Kethval the Undying stepped into view. He was even more terrifying in person than he had been in the recordings. Nearly 5 meters tall, his body was a fusion of Korvathi biology and military technology. Metal plates covered his scales. His right arm had been replaced entirely by a weapon, a fusion blade that hummed with contained energy. His eyes glowed with targeting systems that tracked Yara's every movement. He had killed over 400 opponents in this arena. He had never lost. He was the face of Korvathi power, the symbol of their empire's strength. The crowd chanted his name like a prayer. Kethval studied Yara across the sand. His voice boomed through enhancement speakers in his throat. Human, you have surprised us all. You have made believers of skeptics. You have made me curious. He raised his fusion blade. I will make your death quick." As a sign of respect, Yara said nothing. She was too busy watching his stance, his weight distribution, the way he favored his right side where the weapon was heaviest. The championship horn sounded. Kithvol attacked. The first exchange lasted less than 3 seconds. His fusion blade carved through the air fast enough to leave burning trails. Yara dodged the first strike, ducked the second, and took the third across her ribs as she rolled away. Pain exploded through her chest. She felt bones crack. Blood soaked through her arena suit before she had even gotten to her feet. The crowd went wild. Yara retreated, putting distance between herself and the champion. Her mind raced through everything she knew, his patterns, his weaknesses, his tendencies. The neck, she reminded herself. The left side of the neck. That was her target. Everything else was just survival. The next hour was the longest of her life. Kethval was everything the legends promised. He was fast, despite his size. Strong beyond anything natural, and smart enough to have survived 3 decades of challenges. He adapted to her tactics almost as quickly as she tried them. He cornered her against pillars and drove her into the shifting sand and nearly killed her a dozen times. But he couldn't finish her. Yara had spent a year learning to survive against things that should have killed her. She had faced creatures faster than Kethvol, creatures stronger than Kethvol, creatures that broke every rule she thought she knew. None of them had been able to end her. She used everything now. Every trick, every technique, every desperate gamble she had learned or invented. She made him chase her through the pillars. She used the shifting sand to throw off his balance. When he cornered her, she went for his sensors, throwing sand at his eye implants, forcing his targeting systems to recalibrate. 2 hours passed. Then 3. Both of them were damaged now. Yara had broken ribs, a shattered knee, cuts across most of her body, and one arm that wouldn't move right. Kethval had lost sensors to her attacks, taken hits to joints that even his armor couldn't fully protect, and was moving slower than he had at the start. The crowd had stopped cheering. They watched in stunned silence as the impossible match continued. In the Emperor's box, advisors whispered urgently to their leader. This wasn't supposed to happen. The championship was supposed to be a celebration of Korvathi supremacy, not a demonstration of human stubbornness. Yara knew she was running out of time. Her body was failing. Her vision was blurring from blood loss and exhaustion. If this went on much longer, she would simply collapse, and Kethval would finish her at his leisure. She needed to end it now. She stopped running. Kethval paused, surprised by the sudden change. "You surrender, human? Wise. I will." Yara charged. She ran straight at him, ignoring the pain screaming from every part of her body. She ran through the shifting sand and the burning light and the roar of the crowd that had started again at this unexpected turn. Kethval raised his fusion blade for the killing stroke. Yara dropped into a slide, passing under the blade as it swept over her head. She came up inside his guard, closer than anyone had been to him in 30 years. She had one chance, one moment, one target. Her hand found the broken piece of her own armor that she had been saving, a shard of metal she had worked loose during the fight and hidden in her palm. She drove it upward with everything she had left. The shard found the gap in his neck, the spot she had studied for months. The old wound, the hidden weakness. The shard sank deep. Kethval the Undying made a sound like thunder breaking. His fusion blade fell from suddenly weak fingers. His massive body swayed, then crashed to the sand like a falling building. Yara stood over him, barely upright, blood dripping from wounds too numerous to count. She looked up at the Emperor's box with eyes that refused to close. "I claim champion's rights," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper, but the arena's sound systems caught it and amplified it across the stadium. "Under your own laws, I claim them." The Emperor leaned forward. 2 million Korvathi held their breath. Champion's rights. The ancient tradition, a demand that could not be refused, granted to any who defeated the reigning champion in single combat. Everyone expected her to ask for freedom, for rescue, for herself. "I demand," Yara said, forcing the words out through pain and exhaustion. "The release of every prisoner in the lower cells. Everyone I trained. Everyone who fought beside me in spirit. They go free. They go home. Silence. The Emperor's advisors erupted in argument. This wasn't right. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. She should have asked for her own freedom, not for others. But the law was the law. Champions' rights were absolute. Even the Emperor could not refuse without destroying the legitimacy of the games themselves. The Emperor raised one hand, and the argument stopped. Granted, he said. The word echoed across the arena like a death sentence. Yara smiled for the first time in a year. Then her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the sand next to the champion she had defeated. The last thing she heard before consciousness left her was the sound of her own heartbeat, still fighting, still refusing to stop. She had done it. Now she just had to survive long enough to see the results. Yara woke in a medical bay that smelled of chemicals she didn't recognize. Her body was wrapped in bandages and connected to machines that beeped softly in the dim light. Everything hurt. But it was a distant kind of pain. The drugs in her system were doing their work. She was alive. Somehow, impossibly, she was still alive. A Korvathi medic noticed her eyes opening and stepped back quickly. He bowed his head in a gesture she had never seen a Korvathi make toward a prisoner. "Champion," he said, "you are awake. I will inform the administrators." Champion. The word felt strange. Wrong. She had never wanted to be their champion. She had only wanted to survive long enough to set others free. Over the next few days, she learned what had happened while she slept. The prisoners from the lower cells, 347 of them, from 47 different worlds, had been released according to her demand. Ships had been provided to return them to their home planets. Some had already left. Others were waiting for transport. A few had refused to go until they could thank her personally. The galaxy was in shock. News of the championship had spread far beyond the Korvathi Empire. A human, captured and forced to fight for her life, had not only survived but had used her victory to free hundreds of strangers. The story was being told on worlds Yara had never heard of, to species she had never seen. On Earth, they were calling her a hero. The Korvathi offered her everything. Wealth beyond counting. A palace on their capital world. Citizenship in the Empire with full rights and privileges. They wanted her to stay, to become the new face of their games, to prove that their system could create champions from any species. Yara refused it all. She had won the right to leave, and she intended to use it. The Korvathi provided a shuttle small, barely functional, but enough to reach the edge of their space where she could be picked up by friendlier ships. They could have given her better, but she suspected they were hoping the journey would kill her. Some of them probably thought that would solve their embarrassment problem. She didn't care. She had survived worse. The freed prisoners gathered to see her off. Mirix, the young Pelori she had taught so long ago, pressed her forehead against Yara's palm, a gesture of deep respect among her people. Kassax, the Thorn warrior, simply stood at attention and said nothing. But his eyes said everything. Dozens of others came forward with their own gestures, their own words, their own promises. They would remember. They would tell their children. They would make sure the galaxy never forgot what one human had done for them. Yara boarded her shuttle and left the Korvathi homeworld behind. The journey was quiet. She spent most of it sleeping, letting her battered body heal as the stars slid past. Her shuttle's communication systems were basic, but she managed to send a message to Earth, letting them know she was alive and coming home. She was halfway to the border when the Korvathi warship appeared. It dropped out of faster-than-light directly in front of her, massive and bristling with weapons. Her shuttle's sensors identified it as a destroyer-class vessel, more than enough firepower to turn her into dust. A communication came through. A Korvathi admiral appeared on her screen. "Champion Chen," he said. His voice was cold. "The Emperor has reconsidered your departure. A technicality has been found in your championship claim. You will return with us to the arena to resolve this matter." Yara stared at the screen. She was too tired to be afraid, too broken to feel anger. She simply felt a heavy kind of sadness. Of course they couldn't let her go. Of course they would find a way to drag her back. The Empire could not allow a human to defeat their system and walk away free. She was preparing to fight to die, probably, but fighting all the same when the first ship dropped out of faster-than-light behind her. Then another, then another. 17 ships appeared in the space between Yara and the Corvathi warship. They came in all sizes and shapes, from small fighters to medium cruisers. Their hulls were painted with symbols from a dozen different worlds. Pelori vessels, Thorn battleships, Tessic raiders, ships from species Yara barely recognized. All of them positioning themselves between her and the destroyer. A new communication overrode the Corvathi admiral's transmission. The face on the screen was Mirix, the young Pelori, somehow looking older than her years. "The human goes home," Mirix said. Her voice carried across all frequencies, broadcast to every ship in the area. "She saved our lives. She gave us our freedom. Touch her, and you face us all." The Corvathi admiral's expression shifted. He was calculating odds, weighing options. 17 ships was not much against the full power of his empire, but destroying them here would mean war with nearly 50 worlds at once, worlds that had never cooperated before, worlds that had no reason to unite except for a single human woman. The silence stretched for a long moment. Finally, the admiral spoke. "This is not over, human. The empire has a long memory." The destroyer turned and jumped away. Yara sat in her shuttle, surrounded by ships crewed by beings who owed her their lives, and she allowed herself to cry for the first time in over a year. Earth welcomed her home as a hero. There were parades, speeches, medal ceremonies that seemed to go on forever. Politicians wanted to use her story. Admirals wanted to debrief her. Scientists wanted to study her. Everyone wanted something from the woman who had defeated the empire. Yara gave them what they needed. She answered questions. She accepted honors. She smiled for cameras and shook hands with leaders, but in quiet moments, when she was alone, she thought about the cells. She thought about the beings still trapped there, the ones she hadn't been able to save. She thought about the network she had built and the seeds she had planted. The freed prisoners had returned to their worlds, but they hadn't forgotten. Reports came back to Earth of new alliances forming, of species that had never cooperated now working together. The story of the arena was spreading, changing, becoming something larger than Yara herself. A year after her return, the first Galactic Abolition Treaty was signed. 47 worlds agreed to ban gladiatorial combat and to refuse trade with any empire that practiced it. The Corvathi protested, threatened, blustered, but they were facing something they had never expected. Unity forged in the cells of their own prison. A journalist asked Yara about it during an interview. She was older now, still carrying scars that would never fully heal. But her eyes were clear, and her voice was steady. "They kept waiting for me to beg," she said, "to ask for rescue, to break. They thought that's what humans do. That's what soft creatures do." She smiled, thin, sharp, unbroken. "I was too busy building an army." The journalist asked if she had any regrets, if she wished she had simply asked for her own freedom instead of sacrificing it for strangers. Yara thought about it for a moment. She thought about the cells and the sand and the blood. She thought about Mirix and Kassax and hundreds of others. She thought about the ships that had come to save her when she had no right to expect salvation. "No," she said finally. "I wouldn't change anything. Not one moment." The arena entrance had shut firmly behind her that first day. She had walked in alone, facing impossible odds, with no hope of rescue. She had walked out having changed the galaxy. That was what humans did, she realized. That was what her species had always done. From the first moment they climbed down from the trees and looked up at the stars, they survived. They adapted. They refused to stay down, and when they had the chance to save only themselves, they chose to save everyone else instead. The Corvathi had wanted entertainment. They had wanted to watch a soft creature die for their amusement. Instead, they had learned a lesson that would reshape the galaxy for generations to come. Never underestimate a human, especially one who never asks for rescue.